My name is Evelyn Carter, and I am 66 years old. I never imagined that in the quiet stretch of my life, after raising my only daughter and saying goodbye to my husband, far too soon, I would be sitting alone in a drafty house on the edge of Asheville, North Carolina, wondering if my own child still remembered who I was. It happened on a cold evening in late November, the kind of night when the wind whistles through the cracks in old windows and you find yourself pulling a blanket tighter around your shoulders. The roof of my little wooden house had been leaking for weeks. A slow drip found its way into a pan I had set out in the corner of the living room, and each time the water hit, it sounded like a clock ticking louder than it should. I had tried patching it myself, but age and arthritis have a way of humbling you. My knees simply would not let me climb that ladder anymore. Before we dive into family betrayal, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Hearing from people around the world makes these stories even more powerful and reminds us how connected we all are. So I did something I rarely do. I picked up the phone and called my daughter Laura. My voice shook a little, not from the cold, but from the vulnerability of asking for help. "Laura, I said I was wondering if you could come by this weekend. The roof has been giving me trouble and I could use a hand." There was a pause on the other end. For a moment, I let myself hope. Maybe she would surprise me. Maybe she would say, "Of course, Mom, I'll be there." But instead, Laura let out a soft laugh, the kind you give when someone asks a favor you think is unnecessary. "Mom," she said flatly, "I'm too busy right now. You'll have to figure it out yourself. Please don't bother me with things like this." Her words landed like stones in my chest. I pressed the phone to my ear, hoping she would change her tone, but she had already said goodbye. I sat there in silence listening to the echo of her dismissal. In that moment, the cold in my living room felt sharper, as though her distance had seeped into the walls themselves. I never thought I would be a burden to my own child. I gave her everything I had, years of teaching extra classes, so she could go to college nights spent sewing dresses, because we couldn't afford the ones in the store, mornings rising before dawn to pack her lunches. After her father passed, it was just the two of us. I thought that bond would last a lifetime, but it seems grief built a wall instead of a bridge. That night, I lay awake in bed staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering how love could turn into indifference so quietly. I asked myself questions no parent ever wants to ask. If I fell and couldn't get up, would she come? If my last breath slipped away in this house, would she regret the words she had spoken? Friends, before I take you further into this story, let me pause to ask, have you ever felt abandoned by the very people you thought would always stand by you? If you have, you know that silence on the other end of the phone is sometimes louder than any shout. I did not know it then, but the days ahead would change everything. Life has a strange way of revealing truth at the most unexpected times. What began with a leaky roof and a daughter's cold refusal would soon collide with a twist I never could have predicted. It was something as ordinary as a folded slip of paper, something I bought at a corner store for the price of a cup of coffee. That small, insignificant thing would open a door I didn't even know existed and show me who truly cared about me and who only cared when fortune knocked on the door. So if you're listening now, stay with me. This story is not just about disappointment, it's about revelation, about the way money can expose the cracks already hidden in a family's foundation. And perhaps most of all, it's about the lesson I had to learn in the hardest way possible. Love that waits for wealth isn't love at all. If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me. When I was a little girl growing up in western North Carolina, I used to sit on the porch with my mother and listen to the mountains breathe. That's what she always said, the wind through the pines was the mountains breathing. I carried that sense of belonging with me my whole life, and when I married my husband Thomas, we built our small house not too far from those very woods. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and in those early years, that was more than enough. When Laura was born, our world became even brighter. I still remember her first steps across the kitchen floor, her little hands covered in biscuit dough because she had insisted on helping me cook. Thomas laughed until tears rolled down his face, and I thought to myself that we were the luckiest people alive. We didn't have wealth, but we had a kind of richness that money couldn't touch. Thomas worked long hours at the mill, and I taught at the local elementary school. Every extra penny we saved went toward Laura's future. We never took fancy vacations, but we spent our summers fishing at Lake Junaluska or hiking the trails off the Blue Ridge Parkway. Looking back, those were the moments that stitched our family together thread by thread, like a quilt of simple joys. When Laura was in high school, I worked evenings tutoring children just to help pay for her band trips. I used to sit in the bleachers during football games, bundled up in a blanket, watching her play the clarinet with such focus. My heart swelled with pride every time. I told myself, Evelyn, this girl will go places. She will have more than you ever did. And that was enough reason to sacrifice. But life has its way of rearranging the pieces. Thomas died of a heart attack when Laura was just 19. One moment he was fixing the fence, the next he was gone. Losing him was like losing half the sky. I remember sitting in the pew at his funeral holding Laura's hand as if it were the only anchor keeping me from drifting away. In that moment, I thought our bond would only grow stronger. We only had each other left. For a time it did. We cried together, cooked dinner side by side, shared stories of Thomas late into the night. I believed grief had bound us in a way nothing could undo. But then came college, and then a new job in Charlotte, and slowly the phone calls grew shorter, the visits farther apart. At first I told myself it was normal. Children grow up, they make their own lives. You have to let them go. Still, there were moments that cut me deeper than I wanted to admit. Birthdays missed, holidays shortened. Once on Thanksgiving, I cooked an entire turkey and all the fixings expecting Laura to drive home. But she called that morning to say she had other plans with friends. I set the table anyway out of habit, and then I sat alone staring at the empty chair across from mine. The turkey went mostly uneaten. I clung to the memories of who we used to be. The little girl who used to bring me wildflowers, the teenager who cried into my arms after her first heartbreak, the young woman who promised after her father's funeral, "Mom, I'll always be here for you." Somewhere along the way, that promise faded like handwriting in the rain. After Thomas passed, keeping up the house was my responsibility. At first, I managed well enough. I painted the shutters, mowed the lawn, patched little cracks with stubborn determination. But the years catch up with you whether you want them to or not. Arthritis stiffened my hands, my knees ached with every step on the stairs. The house began to whisper back its age, groaning under storms, peeling at the edges. Sometimes neighbors would offer to help, but I was too proud to say yes. I wanted Laura to be the one. Not because I needed free labor, but because I longed for proof that she still cared. Asking her to fix the roof that night wasn't about the leak. It was about needing my daughter, needing to feel like I still mattered to her. Her refusal hit me like a second widowhood. The first time I lost my husband. The second I realized I was losing my daughter, though she was still alive. People talk about family betrayal in dramatic ways, inheritances, stolen arguments that split households. But sometimes the sharpest betrayal is quieter. It's the phone that doesn't ring, the chair that stays empty, the dismissive laugh that tells you you've become a burden. I tried to remind myself of all the good years of the child I raised with so much love. I told myself she was just busy, stressed, tired. But deep down, I knew something had shifted between us. The girl I once tucked into bed every night had grown into a woman who saw me less as a mother and more as an obligation she wished would fade into the background. And yet, even with the disappointment, even with the silence, I could not stop loving her. A mother's heart doesn't work that way. Love doesn't just end, it waits. Sometimes it waits in vain, but it waits all the same. In those quiet evenings, I found myself sitting by the window, looking at the Blue Ridge Mountains in the distance, remembering the sound of them breathing. I wondered if Laura ever remembered it too. I wondered if she ever missed the simplicity of home, the warmth of belonging. What I didn't know then was that fate had its own way of answering my questions. It wouldn't be through words or apologies, but through a turn of events so unlikely that even now I still shake my head when I think of it. It would come in the form of something small, something ordinary, a folded ticket bought on a whim. And that, dear listener, is where the story begins to change. If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me. It began as nothing more than a whim. I had walked down to the little corner store on Merriman Avenue, the same one where I usually bought flour or milk. My knees ached from the cold, and I remember thinking that the simple act of stepping outside would at least shake the loneliness off my shoulders. On the counter right beside the register, there was a roll of lottery tickets. The bright colors looked almost out of place in that small store, like balloons in a funeral parlor. "Why not?" I muttered under my breath. I handed the clerk a couple of dollars the same way I might buy a cup of coffee. I didn't believe in luck. I certainly didn't believe in miracles. To me, it was just a little piece of paper to tuck into my coat pocket, something to fold and forget. The night of the drawing, I was sitting alone with the television humming low. The announcer called out the numbers, and I glanced down at the slip in my hand. One by one they matched. My heart stumbled. Surely I was misreading it. I fetched my glasses, double-checked, triple-checked. But there it was, every single number aligned. I sat in stunned silence. The world outside carried on as usual. The wind rattled the branches, a dog barked in the distance, but inside my living room, everything tilted. A woman who had been counting pennies for groceries just hours earlier was suddenly holding a ticket worth millions. At first I told no one. I slid the ticket into an envelope, tucked it inside my Bible, and left it there while I tried to gather my wits. I spent the next few days walking around as though nothing had happened, my secret pulsing against my chest like a hidden heartbeat. I thought about what Thomas would say if he were here. He would laugh, lift me in his arms, and say, "Evelyn, the mountains finally breathed fortune into our lives." Of course, news like that doesn't stay quiet for long. When I went to claim the prize, word spread like wildfire through Asheville. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to me in months suddenly appeared at my door with pies and casseroles. Strangers stopped me at the grocery store to shake my hand. It was as if money had turned me into a different person in their eyes, someone worthy of attention, of admiration. And then came Laura. She showed up one Saturday morning without warning. I opened the door and found her standing there with a bouquet of roses in her hands, her smile stretched a little too wide. "Mom," she said breathlessly, "I heard the news." "Oh, Mom, I am so sorry for not being around more. Things have been crazy, but that's going to change, I promise you." I stood there holding the door, remembering the sound of her laugh on the phone the night I begged for help with the roof. The contrast made my throat tighten. Still, I let her in. She hugged me tightly, kissed my cheek, and spoke with a sweetness I hadn't heard in years. She stayed the whole afternoon bustling around the kitchen, cooking with me like she used to when she was a teenager. She asked about my health, my neighbors even about the garden she hadn't touched in years. To anyone else, it might have looked like a reunion, but in my heart, doubt sat heavy. Was this love rediscovered, or greed dressed up as affection? In the days that followed, Laura called nearly every evening. "Mom, have you thought about moving closer to me? Charlotte has great hospitals. You wouldn't have to live in this drafty old house." Another time she said, "We could invest that money wisely, you know. I could help you manage it. We could make sure it grows." Her eagerness rang louder than her concern. And yet while Laura circled me with her newfound devotion, the people who had always been there remained unchanged. Margaret Hayes, my widowed neighbor, stopped by every Tuesday with a loaf of cornbread or a basket of apples. She never once mentioned the lottery. Instead, she sat at my kitchen table telling stories about her grandkids or listening while I read aloud from the Psalms. With Margaret, I felt normal safe, like Evelyn the neighbor, not Evelyn the millionaire. Then there was Tommy Johnson, the little boy from down the street. His mother worked double shifts at the diner, so sometimes he'd knock on my door with his math homework. "Miss Evelyn," he'd say shyly, "could you help me with these fractions?" We'd sit at the table for an hour, his pencil scratching across the paper while I guided him gently. When he left, he always gave me a crooked smile and said, "Thanks, you're the best." Tommy didn't know or care about the lottery. To him, I was just the lady who helped him understand decimals. These two, Margaret and Tommy, were like mirrors reflecting back what true care looked like. It wasn't wrapped in roses or spoken with hurried apologies. It was steady, small, and real. One evening, Laura brought up the subject directly. We were sitting in the living room, the television flickering in the background. She leaned forward, her eyes bright. "Mom, this money is a blessing. You shouldn't have to worry about anything again. Why don't you come live with me? I'll handle all the finances. You can just relax." Her words might have comforted another parent, but for me they pierced deeper than she realized. All I could hear was the echo of her voice on that phone call, Mom. I'm too busy. Don't bother me. I looked at her and asked quietly, Laura, if I hadn't won this lottery, would you be sitting here right now? For a moment her smile faltered. She looked down, fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. Of course, Mom, she murmured, but the conviction in her voice was thin as paper. That night after she left, I sat by the window again, watching the mountains darken under the evening sky. The truth pressed itself against my chest. Money had not changed who Laura was. It had only revealed it. And somewhere deep inside, I knew I would have to decide how to handle this gift of fortune. Not just for myself, but for what it would teach the people around me, especially my daughter. I decided to wait before making any announcements about what I planned to do with the money. For a while, I let Laura believe that the prize hadn't come through yet, that it was still processing, as I put it. I wanted to see how long her devotion would last without the certainty of wealth. Mom, she said one evening on the phone, her voice honey-sweet, don't worry about a thing. Once that money clears, we can figure everything out together. Once that money clears. The words rang in my ears long after I hung up. In the meantime, life around me continued much as before. Margaret still came by with her cornbread and her gentle humor, telling me about her granddaughter's piano recital. Tommy still knocked on my door with his homework, his earnest face lighting up when he finally solved a tough problem. With them, nothing had changed. That constancy became the yardstick against which I measured Laura's sudden attention. One Saturday, Laura drove up from Charlotte unannounced. She bustled into the kitchen with shopping bags, her tone brisk. I brought you some new clothes, Mom. You should look nice now that people will be paying attention to you. I stared at the blouses and dresses she laid across the counter. They were bright expensive, nothing like the soft cotton shirts I wore every day. Laura, I said gently, I don't need all this. Her smile tightened. Mom, it's not about need. It's about appearances. If you're going to have this money, you should look the part. Trust me, people judge. I wanted to ask her when she had started caring so much about appearances. I wanted to remind her of the girl who once wore patched jeans without shame, who used to tell me, I don't care what people think, Mom, as long as I'm happy. But I bit back the words. The woman standing before me wasn't that girl anymore. A week later, she brought up the idea of selling the house. This place is too old, she declared, running her manicured fingers along the worn banister. You should sell it and move into a condo near me in Charlotte. I can keep an eye on you. And besides, with the money from the lottery, you could live in comfort. I took a slow breath, steadying my heart. Laura, I asked quietly, do you remember the night I called you about the roof? She shifted her eyes, darting to the side. Mom, I was busy that night. Work was insane. I wasn't asking about your schedule, I interrupted softly. I'm asking if you remember how I sounded. I was tired. I was hurting. I needed you. And you laughed. You told me not to bother you. Silence stretched between us. For a moment I thought she might cry. Instead, she straightened her shoulders. I made a mistake, she said, but I'm here now and we have a chance to make things right. Isn't that what matters? Her words might have swayed me if they hadn't been wrapped around. We have a chance, as though love were a bargain struck only when wealth was involved. That night after she left, I sat at the kitchen table long into the dark hours thinking. I opened my Bible, the very place I had first tucked that winning ticket, and read a passage about where your treasure lies, your heart will be also. I asked myself where Laura's heart lay. The answer hurt, but it was clear. I made my decision the next morning. When Laura called, I told her plainly, the lottery money is officially in my account now. I heard the sharp inhale of her breath. Before she could rush into her plans, I continued, and I already know what I'm going to do with it. Mom, she interrupted, excitement rising in her tone. That's wonderful. Listen, let's set up a meeting with a financial advisor. We can? No, Laura, I said firmly. I've chosen to use most of it to help others. There are elderly people in Asheville who are alone just like me. There are children who need support just like Tommy. I'm going to set up a fund for them. The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, she said, So, you're just going to give it away? I'm not giving it away, I replied. I'm investing it in something money can't buy. Care, dignity, kindness. The things I once hoped you would give me freely." Her voice hardened. "Mom, that's reckless. You don't know what you're doing. You'll regret this." "No," I whispered more to myself than to her. "What I regret is realizing too late that I raised a daughter who only came back when she smelled money." I ended the call before she could respond. My hands trembled, but my heart felt strangely light. Later that evening, Margaret came by carrying a pie. She noticed my weary expression and asked, "Are you all right, Evelyn?" I smiled faintly. I think I finally did the hardest thing a mother can do. I told my daughter no. Margaret placed her hand over mine. Sometimes no is the most loving word if it teaches the truth. And little Tommy, when he stopped by for help with his homework that week, looked up at me with his innocent grin and said, "Miss Evelyn, you're the smartest person I know." He had no idea how much those words meant to me in that moment. Standing at the window later that night, I watched the mountains breathe again just like my mother once taught me. The air felt cleaner, my spirit steadier. I had stepped out of the role of victim and into the role of choice. Money had exposed the cracks, yes, but it also gave me the power to decide how to fill them, not with resentment, not with greed, but with something lasting. That was the turning point. The night I stopped waiting for my daughter to show me love and chose instead to live by the truth of who had shown me love all along. I woke up the next morning with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. For the first time since Thomas passed, I felt that my choices were truly my own. The burden of disappointment with Laura was still there, but it no longer weighed me down like chains. It simply existed like a scar on the skin, evidence of pain, but also of healing. I knew what I needed to do. I went to the bank, met with a financial advisor, and explained that I wanted to create a fund. Not for flashy causes or headlines, but for the people I saw every day, the widows who sat alone in their porches, the elderly who shuffled through grocery aisles counting nickels, the children who struggled with their homework while their mothers worked 2 jobs. I called it Hearth of Hope because that's what I wanted it to be, a warm place, a reminder that no one should feel forgotten. When the news spread, neighbors came to thank me. Some even cried, saying it was exactly what the community needed. But the thanks was not what I sought. What I wanted was to replace bitterness with generosity, to turn what could have been a story of family betrayal into a story of restoration. Laura, of course, was furious at first. She called me in a storm of anger. "Mom, how could you? You're giving it all away. Don't you realize what you're losing?" I listened quietly. Then I said, "Laura, money can buy a lot of things, but it cannot buy love. It cannot buy back the years we lost or the moments we ignored each other. I want this money to do what our relationship failed to do, bring comfort and kindness where it's most needed." She didn't answer right away. Then she whispered, "So I don't matter at all." "Oh, child," I said, my voice breaking, "you matter more than any of it. But I don't want you to learn the wrong lesson. I will still leave you a part of this money, not because you earned it, but because I hope you will learn that love cannot wait for wealth. Love must come first, or it is not love at all." She hung up without another word. For days she didn't call. I let the silence settle. It hurt, but it also healed. Sometimes forgiveness means letting go of the outcome, trusting that your words will echo in the heart long after they're spoken. Weeks later, a letter came in the mail. The handwriting was unmistakably Laura's. I opened it slowly, bracing myself. Inside, the words were shaky, as if written with hesitation. "Mom, I don't know how to say this. At first I was angry. I thought you were punishing me. But the truth is, you're right. I did turn away from you when you needed me. I don't know why. Maybe I was selfish. Maybe I was afraid of the reminder of Dad's death. I don't know. But I do know this: when you chose to forgive me, even after everything it broke me. Thank you for not shutting the door completely. I want to try again." Tears slid down my cheeks as I folded the letter. It was not a perfect reconciliation, but it was a start. And sometimes a start is all you need. On Sunday, I shared the story with Margaret as we sat on the porch sipping tea. She nodded knowingly. "You see, Evelyn, forgiveness doesn't excuse the betrayal. It transforms it. You turned family betrayal into a lesson not just for your daughter, but for everyone watching." Her words stayed with me. That evening, I took out my Bible and opened it to the place where I had once hidden the lottery ticket. My eyes fell on the verse I had underlined so many years ago, "For where your treasure is there, your heart will be also." I realized then that my treasure was not in a bank account, not in a winning ticket, and not even in my daughter's approval. My treasure was in the choice to love, to forgive, to keep my heart soft, even when it had been broken. Time has passed since then. The Hearth of Hope Fund has grown. We now run community dinners twice a month where the lonely and the forgotten can sit together at a table and feel seen. Tommy still comes by, though. Now he helps other children with their math homework, proud of the skills he has mastered. Margaret and I host small gatherings where laughter fills the kitchen once more. As for Laura, she visits more often now. She still struggles with pride, but I can see glimpses of the daughter I once knew. She helps me in the garden, sometimes brings a casserole. And once, as we were cleaning up after dinner, she whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." I squeezed her hand and whispered back, "I know, and I forgive you." Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it allows us to walk into the future without dragging the weight of yesterday. That is what I chose, and that is what I hope Laura learns to choose as well. To those of you listening, I want to leave you with this: family betrayal is one of the hardest wounds to bear because it strikes at the very heart of who we are. But we cannot let betrayal define us. We must choose what to do with the pain it brings. We can let it harden us, or we can let it soften us into people who love more deeply, who give more freely, who forgive more courageously. I chose forgiveness. Not because it was easy, but because bitterness would have chained me to the past forever. And now every time I see the light in a neighbor's eyes, every time I hear Tommy's laughter, every time Laura takes one step closer to healing, I know I made the right choice. So let me ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have given away the money? Would you have forgiven the child who once turned you away? Share your thoughts in the comments. I would love to hear your stories. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because together, we can keep telling the stories that matter, the ones that remind us that even in betrayal, there is always the possibility of love, of grace, and of starting again.